trying to do to make up for the fact that it's now harder to make profits in other sectors of the economy, such as manufacturing. Subjected to the forces of the free market, colleges and universities are no longer able to rely on public financial support, either through state funding for public universities or grant-based federal support for students, and must instead contain their costs while seeking sources of revenue elsewhere. As we shall see in a moment, two important consequences follow from the growing market dependency of colleges and universities. One is rising tuition, and hence rising debt and decreased access to higher education for low-income families. As colleges and universities, unable to rely on external public support, turn to students, and students are now appearing in the guise of paying customers, and they're the ones generating revenue for colleges and universities. Another consequence of corporatization is a tight squeeze on the compensation and working conditions of college and university employees, as institutions move to contain costs by substituting a precarious academic workforce dominated by poorly paid adjuncts and graduate students for full-time tenured faculty members. So at first glance, the encroachment of the capitalist marketplace and its profit calculus on colleges and universities might appear to stem from the rise of the for-profit higher education sector. However, the reality is the reverse. Nonprofit colleges and universities have in fact been paving the way for the for-profits, which are only the purest manifestation of a market-oriented rationality perfected by the nonprofits themselves. As a writer named Marc Bousquet has observed in his book, How the University Works, a book that I highly recommend if you're interested in these issues, there are certain, this is quoting Bousquet now, there are certainly some ways that the low-digit single market share of degree-seeking students enjoyed by the for-profits places pressure on certain segments of nonprofit education, especially community colleges. But it is hardly the case that for-profit schools taught nonprofit higher education how to cheaply deliver a standardized, vocationally oriented curriculum designed by tenured administrators and implemented by a massively casual instructional force. That practice was perfected decades earlier by the nonprofits themselves, while billionaire University of Phoenix founder John Sperling was still a labor activist and president of a chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, struggling to better the situation of faculty exploited by his nonprofit higher education employer. So it's important to realize here that, well, it's certainly true that the operative logic of profit and its malicious effects on students and university employees is more transparent at institutions avowedly run for profit, where the money saved from low wages and gained through high tuitions, subsidized, of course, through crushing student debt, is distributed to shareholders in the form of dividends. But it would be a mistake to think that such logic does not operate where it is not immediately visible. As Bousquet observes again, at first glance, there are no shareholders and no dividends at nonprofit institutions. However, the uses to which the university has been put do benefit corporate shareholders. These include shouldering the cost of job training, generations of patentable intellectual property, provision of sports spectacle, vending goods and services to captive student markets, and conversion of student aid into a cheap or even free labor pool. In addition to directly benefiting a corporate shareholder class, the revenue accumulated at nonprofit colleges and universities is being redistributed upward to a growing administrator class. At Roosevelt University here in Chicago, for example, where 71% of total revenues are generated through tuition, that is, students acting as paying customers, the percentage of expenditures devoted to instructional salaries has failed to keep pace with the amount spent on administrative pay. Between 2006 and 2010, there has been a 54% increase in the amount spent on administrator salaries at Roosevelt, and a 50% increase in tuition, while the amount spent on instructional salaries has increased by a mere 17%. Besides growing administrator compensation, the capital accumulated at nonprofit colleges and universities has been spent in an arms race to expand facilities and attract more paying students. More students means more revenue, and the cycle of accumulation begins anew, with administrators and their corporate beneficiaries eager to cash in on a tuition gold rush enabled by a growing demand for a college education and the continued willingness of student lenders to initiate new loans, ensuring that the cost of tuition continues to rise. Thus, even if the revenues accumulated at nonprofit colleges and universities are not being distributed to shareholders as dividends, they are nevertheless a direct means of private enrichment for a managerial class exercising increasing control over the fundamental institutional mission of the university, a mission of private gain, not public good, and it's only appropriate to refer to such an enterprise as a corporation. How much time do I have here? 2 more minutes. So over the last 30 years, tuition at colleges and universities has increased at 4 times the rate of inflation, worsening recently as states cut funding to public universities in the wake of the Great Recession. As the gravitational pull of public university tuition has weakened, the cost of college has skyrocketed. Meanwhile, stagnant family incomes caused by 3 decades of neoliberal economic policies has meant that students must rely on massive amounts of debt in order to afford college. Over the last 30 years, roughly 96% of the growth of average incomes in the US has gone to the richest 10%, as I'm sure many of you know from many of the conversations we've had around these issues now. And over the past decade, the incomes of the remaining 90% has gone down. This means that the share of family income required to cover the cost of college is skyrocketing, impacting low-income families the most severely. So these are the people who have to take out the most debt, and lots of us have to take out debt anyway because we still don't have the incomes to cover the cost of college, which continues to rise. So debt is one of the major symptoms of this corporate education, the logic of a corporatized education. But in addition to shouldering massive debt, the situation, the corporate higher education situation, spells disaster for the widely embraced mission of expanding access to higher education and creating socioeconomic diversity on college campuses. The cost of college and the burden of debt are conspiring to rob American higher education of its traditional associations with self-improvement and social mobility, not to mention its vitality for a functioning democratic society. Priced Out, which is a 2011 study conducted by the Education Trust, found out that out of a pool of 1,186 four-year colleges and universities in the US, only 5 meet the following very modest criteria for ensuring access to qualified low-income students. And those criteria are: enroll a proportion of low-income students at or above the national average, give students at least a 1 in 2 chance of graduating, and require that low-income students pay a share of their family income equal or less than the average middle-income students pay. Of these 1,186 four-year colleges and universities with records of what low-income students pay to attend, just 55 public and 10 private nonprofits, and not a single for-profit, keeps their net price below $4,800. And this is the amount that a low-income student would pay if contributing the same proportion of family income as a middle-income student. If they were to contribute the same proportion as a high-income student, the number would fall to $2,400, at which point the number of institutions would drop even further. Out of these 65 institutions with a net price below $4,600, only 29 give their students a 1 in 2 chance at graduating. And as you can imagine, if you're already going into debt to go into college, it's essential that you graduate to pay off that debt. Otherwise, you wind up in a situation where you owe lots of money and you don't even have the degree that you were taking all the money out to get it for. And this is the situation that, of course, a lot of for-profit, but clearly even a lot of not-for-profit universities put students in. So diminished access for low-income students not only harms those students themselves, but also does irreparable damage to the overall educational mission of colleges and universities. As institutions of higher education become bastions of wealth, their educational values are following suit. And let me just name a few of the consequences of this very, very generally. The constant expansion and improvement of facilities, which indicates a trend toward turning college into essentially a 4-year resort for the children of the well-off as opposed to a place where people go to get an education. Curriculum designed around what brings in the most tuition dollars ensures further cuts to the arts and the humanities. And the increasing prevalence of the business major, even for undergraduate students, which has been widely described as a sham degree. There have been articles over the last few years about how these business programs provide nothing like an education. So the increasing prevalence of the business major is robbing a lot of institutions of their core educational missions. And then finally, the perpetuation of people like Larry Summers and N. Gregory Mankiw, a Harvard economist, teaching at places like Harvard, where they teach children of the wealthy and powerful who will go on to occupy key positions in government and private sector. And the private sector ensures that the ruling classes stay entirely insulated from the reality of the lives of the rest of America. So then, of course, the final consequence is, with decreasing socioeconomic diversity, simply put, rich people don't have to, they're never exposed to the reality of poor or middle-income people. Finally, it's bad for students and bad for the corporatization, that is bad for the educational mission of the university because of the way in which it's harming teachers. And as I mentioned before, we now have a massively casualized academic workforce. It means that instead of having full-time tenure-track people with degrees teaching college courses, we have, for the most part, a group of exploited adjuncts and graduate students teaching for poverty or less than poverty wages. And of course, people like this suffer as a result of their working conditions, but the educational mission of the university is obviously compromised by this as well. And this is what Marc Bousquet has to say about this situation, and it'd be very helpful to think of Columbia College here in Chicago in light of this situation, because what Bousquet says in general about the scene here in higher education is particularly true. Columbia is a great example. 35 years ago, nearly 75% of all college teachers were tenurable. Only a quarter worked on an adjunct, part-time, or non-tenurable basis. Today, those proportions are reversed. If you're enrolled in 4 college classes right now, you have a pretty good chance that one of the 4 will be taught by someone who has earned a doctorate and whose teaching scholarship and service to the profession has undergone intensive peer scrutiny associated with the tenure system. In your other 3 classes, however, you are likely to be taught by someone who has started a degree but not finished it, was hired by a manager, not professional peers, may never publish in the field in which she is teaching, got into the pool of persons being considered for the job because she was willing to work for wages around the official poverty line, often under the delusion that she could work her way into a tenure position, and does not plan to be working at your institution 3 years from now. In almost all courses in most disciplines using non-tenurable or adjunct faculty, a person with a recently earned PhD was available and would gladly have taught your other 3 courses, but could not afford to pay their loans from school and house themselves on the wages being offered. So if you think about what I just said at Roosevelt, where more and more money is going to pay administrator salaries, and they're relying on tuition as their main source of revenue, what you can see is as students pay more and more tuition to the university, that money's being given to administrators and isn't being reinvested in the core educational mission of the university, and consequently the people who deliver the education to you are being squeezed very, very tightly with respect to their compensation, while this bloated administrator class continues to draw big salaries and gets to engage in all these projects like expansion projects, building new sports stadiums, and everything. Perhaps in the Q&A we can go into more detail about some of the actions that Cash has been engaged in around these issues, especially student debt and the casualization of the academic labor force, but I have a feeling that I may even already have used all my allotted time, so I'm going to turn it over to the next group. Thank you very much for your patience.
We're representatives for our club at Oakton Community College, which has campuses in Des Plaines and Skokie. We're representatives of Students for Social Justice. Me and Oscar both participated in a teach-in last semester we called Why Occupy, because we contributed most of our presentations to topics involved in the Occupy movements. Oscar and I both did research projects for our English class, our English 101 class with our teacher who's here today. My group did our presentation on Sodexo, which is a multinational food service corporation, which is at Oakton Community College. They provide our cafeteria food, food for vending machines. They also cover any catering that Oakton needs. We do not like Sodexo. They only care about themselves. They don't really do much for our consumers, which are us college students that have nowhere else to go for our food while we're at school. After our teach-in, from the presentation my group gave, there was negative feedback from a couple of representatives from Sodexo that were there. as well as a lady that works for Oakton and works for Sexo. They all three gave us negative feedback. From this has fueled our want to get rid of Sexo out of our school. The woman that works at Oakton and Sexo suggested that we meet with her to discuss some of the things that were mentioned during our presentation. During our discussion with her, we found out that the contract with Sodexo was going to be up this year, and that we as students and our faculty members can put together parameters to put into the contract with the food provider, so we can essentially get rid of Sodexo or have them change the parameters with which they provide our food for us. Some of the parameters that we put together involved having all our foods organic or locally grown. We would like all our foods to be labeled as organic, and the genetically modified foods to be labeled so that we know what we're eating. We would like any eggs from chickens to be from cage-free chickens. We want the beef to be grass-fed. We want seasonal produce and not just potatoes and corn, considering that the least nutritional foods there is. We want vegan and vegetarian foods, and not just the side dishes for us to eat little bits. We want the entire main course vegetarian and vegan foods, since there's more people changing their diets to be this way. We also want the food providers to allow us students to have a student-run cafe in the school so that we can generate money for our clubs within the school, so we can have more activities to participate in. We'd also like them to keep the employees that they already have, rather than getting rid of them and hiring new ones. And then to provide the training that these employees need, and give them sustainable wages so they have a better living situation.
Yippee.
We also wish that they would contribute more to recycling rather than polluting the earth even more. These parameters, we sent them to our food service committee, which they will be discussing them and deciding whether or not to put them into the new contract. When they come up with all the parameters, they send them out to the food service providers that they wish to have, and if they can meet these parameters, they will give them a price and how much it's going to cost or whatever. The one food service provider that we really want as a club is Organic Life, which is from the area. It's from Northbrook. It's a very small organic food service provider. They're already in the Niles North High School, which is in the Elton area. Members of our group went to the Niles North and sampled the food in the cafeteria and toured the cafeteria and spoke with a Organic Life representative who discussed with them the possibility of them coming to Oakton. At our own school, we have been having a table up beside our cafeteria to inform our colleagues and professors on what we are doing as a club involving Sodexo and what's going on in our school. We held a survey that concluded that 95% of our students wanted the same things that we did. They want a change in our cafeteria, and they were for our parameters. Okay.
Thank you for that, Savannah. I'd like to touch upon that and branch off. On top of the survey, we also held an open forum in the cafeteria where we presented material on the large issues of food ethics and invited the students to engage and present their questions and concerns. We were shocked by the participation from the students. I mean, they were engaging with us. They were talking about what they wanted and what they wanted to hear, or what they wanted their voice to be spoken up. Some of the things that they addressed were food allergies and other underlying health issues that Sodexo can't supply for. There's just food there that they can't eat. And also, the people there are going to be stuck for a large part of the day, so they wanted food that they could have throughout the day, nutritious food, healthy food, and so on. We also met with the Student Government Association, the SGA, to present our parameters, which unfortunately did not leave us with much added support. There was one person in there that was really interested in what we had to say because of our ongoing effort, but they were already part of the Food Service Committee. And just to recap what the Food Service Committee is, the Food Service Committee is a student faculty run organization, it's a committee that relates to all the food decisions that go on at Oakland. So they were the one that brought in Sodexo in the first place 10 years back. Also, we're still waiting for a response from the person in charge of our financial decisions. We contacted several Oakland employees and eventually came to find out that despite all of our efforts, they decided to hire an outside food consultant. To give information,